Okay, well, kia ora. Welcome everybody to the Waikato Affordable Energy webinar series. I'm Harvey Brooks, Executive Director of the of Wellbeing Waikato, and I'm the host today. And I'm really thrilled to have with me Ernie Newman as our co-host, our Amy Van Garderen, who's looking after the question and answers process for today, and then our guest today, Paul Fugue. And Jessica Walker from Consumer New Zealand / Power Switch. So I'm just going to flick on to my presentation to do a little bit of an introduction, and then we'll hand over to Paul and Jess for their presentation today. But to do that, I just need to share my screen, so just give me 1 second, please. Amy, can you just give me a thumbs up that you can see that screen? Okay, great. Alrighty. All right, well, we'll just start today with a karakia and then a little bit of housekeeping, and we'll get into the presentation. So he karakia. Whakatakatahau ki te uru, whakatakatahau ki te tonga, kia mai kina ki uta, kia mataratara ki tai, ehi yaki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhunga, haumia hui e, taiki e. All right, a little bit of housekeeping, everybody. The webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available on our website in the next 24 to 48 hours. If you are on today and you are not comfortable with your image being part of the recording, please just turn off your camera now to keep yourself safe. In terms of questions and answers, we ask that you hold the questions until the end, or if you'd like to ask a question during the presentation, please use the chat function and put your questions in the chat, and then Amy will aggregate those and present them to Jess and Paul at the end of the webinar. Okay, so as I said, I'm Harvey Brooks from Wellbeing Waikato, joined today as co-host by Ernie Newman, who has a long and storied career in competition and commerce in New Zealand, and has a real significant interest not only in electricity affordability, but food affordability as well. And Ernie and I have worked on that in the Waikato as well. If you haven't heard of Wellbeing Waikato and this is your first time on the webinar, welcome. Just who are we? We're an independent charitable trust. We're focused on bringing together regional intelligence about the things that are most important to households and whānau in the Waikato region. We see our job is to identify emerging risks and opportunities early and surface the underlying drivers or root causes of those challenges, not just the symptoms, and then share that intelligence with decision makers, government, iwi, councils, community organisations, and the private sector across the Waikato and wider, so that they can make better decisions. And you can see there some of the reports that we've worked on over the last 2 or 3 years around things like food, housing, well-being in different parts of the region, and we produce a regular annual State of the Region report. If you're interested, we've just released a report on social investment in New Zealand, which is a jazzy phrase these days being used by a lot of people, but we thought it didn't really have much in the way of definition about what it was. So we've released a report about that 10 or so years after the concept was first introduced. And we're now working on how to actually apply that in a practical way to wellbeing in the Waikato. So just to jump onto energy, and I will acknowledge that I do use the words energy and electricity a little bit interchangeably, but I'm really particularly today talking about electricity affordability because that is the thing which we know from evidence, and Paul and Jess will talk about that today as well, is a real big driver of household well-being, not only in the Waikato, but across New Zealand and maybe across the world. To go back to the basics, so forgive me, energy, electricity, it needs to be both affordable, reliable, and sustainable. Some people call that the energy trilemma. Getting one or two of those can sometimes be relatively easy, but finding the radical middle where all three has been achieved, are being achieved, is really what we're interested in and how we get there. The 4 big questions that we've put to all of our presenters are on the screen there. We're not asking everybody to answer every question, but to identify those which are most relevant to the mandate of their organisation and their work, and share their learnings and their insights with us. So first, how does electricity actually work? When you turn on the switch, where does that come from? And why is it designed that way? Secondly, what's driving power prices and how could they be made more affordable? Thirdly, how does energy affordability affect household and community well-being? And then fourthly, what would a better system look like and how do we get there? And quite a few people now are talking about this as the electricity election. And so I suppose question number 4 really is the time to be asking that and looking for answers. And I know Paul and Jess are going to really help us with that today. Just a little bit of background data. I shared this last week as well, and I'm not trying to take anything away from the presenters because their data is far better than mine. But I was just intrigued. During August, we had some cold snaps where the sun wasn't shining and the wind wasn't blowing, and our spot electricity prices, which you can see on the left there, shot up briefly, all good and well. But we also started to see some excursion notices from Transpower, and this one in particular on the 4th of August was because one of the generators at Huntly tripped and wasn't available, and the system, when it peaks, in terms of demand, such as you could see there, relies on those thermal generators. So when they suddenly aren't there, our system's somewhat at risk. And I'm always amazed by the fact that when you start to understand the electricity system a little, and I only understand it a little, it is probably the most complicated machine in the world. And so it is really delicate and sensitive to these kind of changes. Paul, I know you've got some better data on this as well, but just a couple of graphs that I've relied on a little bit over the last few months. On the left, the changes in energy prices, electricity prices since 1975 in New Zealand. The blue is residential, the red is commercial, green is industrial. And you can see there has been a steady increase, especially in residential electricity prices over that time, and a bit of a spike recently as well. And on the right-hand side, some work that was done by Gareth Cartwright on energy hardship, and the sobering fact for me that something like 200,000 households in New Zealand can't afford to keep their dwellings adequately warm. And that, from a wellbeing point of view, is the thing that really sticks with me. If you've been watching the media recently, you'll have seen in the last few days we've had announcements from most of the big gentailers about their financial results. I'm not going to read them all, but they seem to be all doing fairly well. So there's a definite tension in here between the performance and profitability of these organisations and the ability of households to keep their houses warm and dry. I've just highlighted on the right there a media release from the Herald this morning about Meridian, which is all good, and an interesting promise that they've given to keep energy price increases below the rate of inflation in the coming year. So let's see how that goes, eh? Right, so just to introduce Paul and Jess and then hand over to them. So Paul Fugue has worked in the energy sector for nearly 40 years, beginning his career as an engineering cadet with the former New Zealand Electricity Department, NZED, in the late 1980s. And over his career, he's held a wide range of roles across the sector and seen firsthand how New Zealand's electricity system has evolved from a government-run public service to today's market-driven model. And I'm sure he'll say more about that. For the past 6 years, Paul has managed Power Switch, Consumer New Zealand's independent energy comparison service, while advocating for fairer outcomes for electricity consumers. Joining Paul today is Jessica Walker, Communications and Campaigns Manager at Consumer New Zealand. Jess is passionate about empowering people to understand and stand up for their rights, as well as challenging the power imbalances that exist across many sectors in New Zealand. So today they're going to share their insights into New Zealand's electricity sector, what's happening in the market, what consumers need to know to make informed decisions, and to get a fair deal. And it's so great to have you here both, and I thank you very, very sincerely. I'm just going to stop sharing and then you'll be able to share your screen, folks. And again, thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Where is...
Should do it.
There we are. Can't see.
We just go to slideshow and go from beginning.
There we go. All right. Hopefully you can see that. Just checking you guys can see that all right?
Yes, perfect.
Hey,
thank you.
Hey, thanks everybody for coming along. Today myself and Jess providing you an overview of the selected insights from our 2026 energy survey and also some broader energy related data. Just for you, those of you unfamiliar with Consumer New Zealand, we are an independent consumer research and advocacy body. We're not for profit, We've been going since 1957, around 70 years. Power Switch, which is what I am in charge of. It's now been going 27 years. We had our 27th birthday a couple of weeks back. So we've been going as long as the market. So the data we're presenting today also informs our advocacy work and also the content we produce through our various channels. It's also part of the evidence base we use when we speak to the politicians and other policymakers, and when we talk to consumers about why they're experiencing what they experience. So just what we're going to cover today is the consumer reality, so what the financial pressures are for households in 2026 from our survey. The sector performance, how the sector is going. Electrification is a big hot topic at the moment. A lot of consumer interest in electrification. You talked about the trilemma before. Traditionally, the trilemma is shown as opposing forces. I think electrification is changing that because those things are all working all together, because basically electrification lowers costs, increases resilience, and also is good for the environment. So that's a bit of a unicorn that I think we need to look at the trilemma again and redraw some of those diagrams. Switching is a big thing that I'm involved with, trying to get people to change to lower cost providers, not just because it's good for them, but because that's the thing that will actually get this market working as it's supposed to. If people start actually changing provider more often, we believe it'll kickstart the market and it will help people help drive down power prices. Then we'll talk about industry perceptions, how consumers are feeling about the sector. Spoiler alert, it's not great. And also we'll just finish with our power petition and the big report we've put out this year. The petition is just closed, and Jess will talk to that and what we're doing next with that. So basically our survey, just give you some background on that. Been doing the survey since 2017 in its current form. We did do energy surveys prior to that, going back to the early 2000s. But this is in terms of its current format, it's been going since 2017. It's nationally representative. So it's not just our members, it goes across a wide cross-section of New Zealand society. So it's statistically representative. Yeah, and basically we've got longitudinal data, so the same questions we've been asking for a number of years, so we can actually track trends over time. So we can go back and look at how the various measures have changed over time, got better or worse, but also we can segment the data by location, by income, household makeup, ethnicity, that sort of thing as well. So I'm going to hand over to Jess now, who's going to talk about the first section, which is what consumers are, the financial pressures facing consumers.
Thank you, Paul. So we'll kick off by diving into what is weighing most on households right now. What this graph shows is our quarterly sentiment tracking. So as Paul said, this is a nationally representative sample. Key to note, a different sample every quarter to asking them what is top of mind for them. You'll see the red line here relates to cost of living. So for a long time, cost of living has been coming out as New Zealanders' top concern. What we noticed this quarter, so July was the last time we asked the question, we finally have seen a pause, in fact, a slight decline in the number of people referencing cost of living as their top concern. In the previous quarter, so that was April 2026, we had 74% of people referencing that this was their number one concern. We're staggered by this. You'll see from this red line here that it has been increasing significantly every quarter. And every quarter we thought it couldn't get any higher. So to see a 74% peak in April was quite something. Be interesting to see what happens when we ask the question again in October. What we've noticed this quarter is that healthcare is starting to ramp back up again in terms of people's concerns, returning to the level of 43% where it was sat since early 2025 until a slight drop in April 2026. We've seen an easing in concerns about the New Zealand economy, down from 39% to 32%. So our team would call that a statistically significant decline. And then we've had a couple of small but significant rises, and these relate to immigration. Concerns about immigration jumped from 5% to 7%. And similarly, with race relations, a jump from 4% of people expressing concern to 7% of people expressing concern. Now, when we talk about cost of living, we ask questions about what is driving people's concerns about their financial outgoings. And you'll see here that food and groceries has been the #1 financial concern since July 2022, which is when this slide starts and when we started asking the questions. But for this webinar, obviously, we're interested in what's happening with energy costs. What we've seen is concerns about the cost of energy rise to a series high of 48%. We always see peaks in concerns about the cost of energy over winter, but even allowing for that, this is quite shocking. This is almost half of the country saying to us that the cost of energy is something that they are seriously concerned about. And for the first time ever, we've seen concerns about the cost of energy overtaking concerns about the cost of housing. So this is people are more worried about paying the energy bill than they are about their rent or mortgage payment, which I'm sure everybody will agree is something that's quite astounding in a country that produces so much renewable energy. Talking about energy, it's just interesting while we've got this slide on screen to note concerns about fuel prices. You will see that in April, we had a massive spike. 51% of people saying they were concerned about the cost of fuel. We all saw the price of the pumps go up massively following the conflicts earlier this year. We're surprised to see those concerns start to decline again to 32%. So we're eager to see what happens in October. Now back to the topic of the day, energy. So I mentioned then that nearly half of people are concerned about the cost of their household energy, but this really digs into what that means for people. This comes from our nationally representative energy retailer survey. We've been asking these questions, as Paul said, every year since 2017. For many households, energy is a real stress point. We've noted this time around that a quarter of households said they struggle to pay their power bills within the last year. That's up quite significantly on previous years. So when we asked the question in 2024, you'll see that it was 18%. So 2 years later, that's now up to a quarter of people struggling to pay their monthly power bill. We also saw a significant increase in the number of people missing payments. So from 19% of households last year to 24% of households this year. Now, missed payment generally means you're also incurring additional fees. So this is people already struggling to pay their bills, now missing paying the bill, and so incurring extra fees on top. So it's just adding insult on top of injury. We've also seen an increase in the number of people having to borrow money from family or friends to pay the bill, up from 14% to 19%. And what this slide doesn't show, but what our data shows, is a huge increase in the number of people having to borrow from elsewhere. So could be Afterpay, buy now, pay later, payday loans. Again, these are all costs that incur additional, at times really high interest. So this is something that we are particularly concerned about. People are taking steps to try and lower their power bill, and this has presented itself with 15% of people telling us they're cutting back on heating because of the cost of power, up from 11% in 2025. What's quite staggering is last year, 30,000 households were disconnected because they couldn't afford to pay their power bill. Now that's post-pay customers. So this is people who pay monthly. There are a lot of people, especially some of our most vulnerable households, who are on prepay. So they're paying for power in advance before they use it. For prepay households, once their credit runs out, their power goes off. And there were over 300,000 individual disconnections last year because of a lack of credit or inability to top up. And this is having real dire consequences for New Zealand. The key point I want to leave you all with here is that of all of these indicators that we're tracking, they are all moving in the wrong direction. So this is what's happening for households. I just want to break down what we're seeing about different demographics. As Paul said, this survey is nationally representative. So what that allows us to see is how different demographics are impacted. you'll see here that energy hardship is concentrated among Pacific peoples, Maori, and lower income households. These are represented in people experiencing the greatest bill payment hardship, the greatest difficulty heating their homes, and also overrepresented in the number of people missing payments, struggling to pay power bills, cutting back on heating, or finding it difficult to heat their home to a level that's comfortable. This is something that should and does cause outrage. So that's what's happening for consumers. But something we track at Consumer New Zealand is not just how people are feeling about their energy provider, but about different sectors too. So that gives us a really good opportunity to compare and contrast. We undertake annual surveying in different sectors. And what this slide shows you is that when we compare energy to banking, KiwiSaver, internet service providers, and insurance, energy as a service is really bucking the trend in terms of satisfaction. So we track how people are feeling in terms of satisfaction, and the key measure for us is very satisfied. So that's people ranking their service provision between 8 and 10. So this isn't people who are very dissatisfied or people who are just feeling, oh, my service is okay. This is people who are very happy. And what we're seeing is people who are very satisfied with their energy is in decline. So it's been declining for 2 years now, from 53% in 2024. In fact, 54% in 2023 was the high. Now we're sitting at 50%. When you look at banking and KiwiSaver, they're actually on the up. So from our perspective, when you are performing worse than the banks, it's time to ask yourself a question. This is not a formal league table. It's worth noting that these surveys are undertaken separately of each other and at different times of the year. But from our perspective, this is still something that provides some really useful context. As part of our energy retailer survey, we ask people about how they're feeling about their particular retailer. So this isn't just about the sector as a whole. This is how you feel about the retailer that you have a relationship with. So who you're getting your bills from, who you're paying your bills to, and who is providing your service. What we found is significant variation in satisfaction depending who your energy provider is. This is anonymized because this is something that is that we sell to the different retailers or try and make available to them so they can see how they're comparing, but we're not in the habit of trying to name and shame here. But something that we would like to point out is that the 4 gentailer brands, so that's Mercury, Genesis, Contact, and Meridian, who collectively hold about 80% of the retail market, you can see them there in the below average. So these are providers who are not satisfying their customers. What this means is the smaller retail brands that are actually pulling the collective average up. So if it wasn't for those smaller players, the overall satisfaction results would be even worse. So we are interested in what's driving satisfaction, how well retailers are providing against the things that consumers really care about. And that's what this chart here shows. So the vertical axis shows how strongly each attribute drives overall satisfaction, and the horizontal axis shows how satisfied customers are with that particular offering. The main point from this slide is that value for money matters the most, followed by customer support and competitive pricing. Both of these obviously point back to directly to cost pressure. This view at the sector level with brand by brand results is available for people that are interested on our website. But I think just as a snapshot, you can see what really matters for people and where retailers are falling down. Now that I've provided you with the overview of how people are feeling, and sadly not good, I'm going to pass back to Paul, who's going to talk to you about electrification.
Yes, electrification, that's households moving away from fossil fuels to electric alternative is a really hot topic for consumers and something we're getting asked a lot of questions about and requests for information from our members and from the general public. That's because households that electrify will increasingly face lower costs than households that do not. As such, it's an area that's got potential to reduce energy hardship as well as the environment. As well as benefit the environment. But in terms of households, electrification breaks down into several distinct decisions. So electrification for households is not a strategy or one decision made by households. It's a series of decisions that are made over time. These decisions happen separately at different points in a household's life cycle and usually under different cost pressures. And the barriers differ for each, so they need to be understood individually, not as a single transition. So if we look at data around EVs, they show the clearest pattern. So it's basically a no regrets decision. Quite a remarkable statistic there from our survey is that 96% of people who bought an EV would do so again. That's one of the highest post-purchase satisfaction rates in any major consumer category we measure. So once consumers make the switch, they don't go back. But for people who haven't bought an EV, 44% of non-EV owners cite purchase price as their primary barrier. Charge and range are also major concerns. But once people cross the barrier, they don't regret it. We look at gas transition. Around 40% of households use gas in some form, that's LPG or reticulated gas. Of those, around 57% are using the same amount as gas as they were 5 years ago. Around 20% have reduced, but still use some. Electricity prices have increased, but gas prices have increased at a greater rate. So it's moving off gas is a bit different. It's a slow burn rather than a rapid transition. Some households are reducing or stopping, but most gas users don't expect major change. Among those who did reduce or stop, cost pressure was the top reason at 39%, followed by switching to electric alternatives, 28%, and improved energy efficiency improvement at 20%. And looking forward, the situation looks similar. 3 in 4 gas users expect to make no real change to their gas use over the next 5 years. The top 3 reasons for not switching are satisfaction based. Gas meets our needs, the appliances still work, and just prefer gas. Cost concerns are further down the list. 11% say they're waiting until appliances need replacing. So appliance end of life is the natural decision point. So people, in terms of whether they've got an appliance that's working, they're not going to rip it out and replace it. When that appliance fails, that's the point at which they'll make the decision around moving away from gas. Similar to solar, has got a lot of interest recently, and we expect solar interest to increase next year because all of the parties have announced, apart from ACT, have announced some sort of incentive scheme for solar uptake for residential consumers. So around half of eligible households, those who don't already have solar, have considered it. So interest in solar is actually quite broad, but most people are still early in the journey. About 6 in 10 never get past thinking about it or doing some light research. Around 1 in 6 have looked into costs or finance, but fewer have got as far as to get quotes or check suitability. There are 2 groups behind that drop-off. The first actively investigated but didn't proceed. They hit hard barriers. 73% say the upfront cost is too high, and 61% believe the payback would take too long. The second group really never looked into it much at all. Their barriers are more about perception. So 46% assumed it would cost too much, and 30% aren't sure it would even save money, while 33% say they lack the savings or access to finance to pay for it. So the striking thing about that second group is they've reached a conclusion without ever getting to the point of receiving a quote. So there's broad interest in solar, but cost perceptions and uncertainty are stopping people from getting an informed price. Just one more thing about electrification, and that's time of use plans. So a change this year is all large retailers who have more than 5% market share are now required to offer a time of use plan or a time of use offering into the market. So on PowerSwitch, we've seen a really large upswing in the number of plans available. because of that. But what we find with time of use plans through our surveying is time of use plans are often missed because many households don't know what plan they're actually on. So there's two findings here. If you look at the left-hand side of that slide, do households know what plan they're on? 29% say they're on a time of use plan, 47% say they're not, but a quarter, close to 25%, simply don't know, which is extraordinary. They can't tell you whether their pricing varies by time of day. If they don't know that, they can't respond to it. On the right-hand side, among the people who do know they're on a plan, it can work. 74% have changed how they use power. Digging into that, 48% have cut their usage at peak times, and 40% have shifted usage into off-peak periods. So time of use can work, but it relies on the consumer taking action and being aware they're on that type of plan. 69% of those people say it saves them money. So this is important for energy hardship because time of use is definitely a way that struggling households can save significant amounts of money on their power bill. So the plans can deliver, and this matters beyond time of use. If you don't know your plan, you're much less likely to respond to time-based pricing. So the other thing that time-based pricing is good for is when you change appliances. So when you buy EVs, it's particularly important because if you can charge your EV overnight at a much lower rate, that really reduces your costs. The same with hot water heating. If you move to more modern hot water cylinders or a hot water heat pump, quite often they come with functionality that you can set the time on the heating of their hot water. So basically you can heat your hot water at low cost periods. And again, because hot water is 30% of the household's consumption, that's a significant saving. I just want to move on to switching, because again, that's another area where people can save a lot of money. Our research shows around 90% of households are paying more than they need to because they're on the wrong plan or with a higher cost provider, which is really interesting because in most markets, for a product like electricity, which is the same no matter who you buy it from, if someone's offering you a lower price, people would switch to that. That's not the case in electricity. So what we find there is many have considered switching, but few actually move. The past 12 months, 42% of energy consumers either switched or seriously considered switching. So on the surface, there's a lot of interest in switching, but far few people who actually do it. For context, if you look at other similar-ish things, sort of consequential products and services, banking sits at around 4% switching. Internet service provider switching is around 13%. If you look at those who consider but didn't switch, 38% they couldn't find a good enough price, and that's the primary barrier. So price both motivates switching and stops it when the savings aren't clear enough. But another really important factor in terms of affordability is what we're increasingly seeing is people being turned away from providers. So people are looking to switch, but cannot find a provider to take them on because their credit history or they're seen as a risky customer. And so we've seen through Power Switch data that increasing over the last few years. That's a real concern. So increasingly switching is for rich people. And that's the irony of it is the people who would most benefit from this market or most benefit from switching to a low cost provider are exactly the customers who are less able to do that. One of the things is perception. People believe switching is going to be harder than it is. And especially the case for people who haven't switched in a long time or have never switched. So the paradox there is people believe it's really hard, so never try. But the people who have switched recently believe it's the opposite. They believe it's really easy. So switching is actually quite straightforward these days, but the perception is it's going to be difficult. And because it's an essential service, it's one of those things that people don't really want to tinker with because the fear of losing supply is greater than the knowledge that they're paying a bit more than they should be. So that's really preventing people from taking advantage of lower cost offers. We look at Power Switch. So we run Power Switch, like I said, for 27 years. We've been running this service. Been putting a lot of effort over the last 5 years to try and increase people's awareness in switching and trust. We're making some inroads there. So for the first time, Power Switch has moved ahead of retailers themselves in terms of where people are coming to find information about switching. So that's really encouraging. And that's the first time we've seen that. Last year, 2025, we saw 1 million users for the first time. That's really encouraging. It's a 50% year on increase and 141% over 5 years. So since 2020, when we started really ramping up the investment in Power Switch and the promotion of switching, we've seen a lot, a rapid increase in site usage. What we've seen on the site is switches are up 75% year on year, and we believe we've delivered around $22 million in consumer savings. Importantly, we've got about 430,000 households. It's close to a quarter of New Zealand households registered with Power Switch now. Why that's important is we can then send those people information when cheaper offers become available, but we can also send them information around things like the value of electrification, the pros and cons of certain appliances, lots of other information we can send those people around lowering their electricity bills. So Power Switch, we're really pleased with this. We've seen a growth in awareness, become a bit of a household name. So that's really encouraging that people are much more aware of our service and are happy to use it, which is great because that really is helping more than anything to try and keep a lid on prices, is that we can get more people changing providers. It'll make retailers sort of wake up and try and compete on price a bit more. Retailers know there's a large section of the customer base who just won't switch, and that means they can charge those customers the most. So we call it a loyalty tax. Those customers who have been with their providers the longest, we find pay more than anyone else. Just quickly, we're the most trusted brand out there in terms of comparison sites. Seen as trusted unbiased. We're not for profit, and that helps. Also, the consumer name really helps. So compared to the other switching sites, we are well ahead in terms of awareness, but also trust in what we do. Yeah, so basically, 59% of consumers are aware of Power Switch. About 40% have used the service, and 29% have attributed it to deciding to switch. But like I said, this is tempered a little bit by the worrying trend of conversion rates. That's what I talked about before, where we're seeing people coming to the site, finding a cheaper deal, looking to switch, but then not being able to switch because the retailer has decided they don't want them as a customer. The biggest complaint we got last year was people looking to switch and the retailer just not taking them on or just not responding to them. So that's unfortunate that we've got people interested in switching, but they're having a bad experience when they actually go to switch. So I'll move back to Jess now to talk about the industry perceptions.
Thanks, Paul. So I previously spoke to you about what was happening with satisfaction, and that was taken from our annual surveys into the different sectors. This that you're seeing now is from our quarterly sentiment tracking, where we're asking a nationally representative sample of New Zealanders how they feel about particular sectors. Basically, how much do you trust them? And what you can see here is that trust in energy providers has softened quite significantly. Energy is the yellow line you can see there. Telcos is green at the top, banks in blue just below the green one, and insurance companies is the purple line at the bottom. What we witnessed was a trust in energy providers steadily declining through 2024 and 2025, more recently mirroring broader sentiment trends. Energy provider trust, like satisfaction, is now lower than both banks and telcos. As I mentioned before, these are taken, sorry, the satisfaction is taken separately from each other. But with this one, we're asking the question at the same time. So people are actively comparing at the time that they're answering these questions. And so this is something we would expect the energy sector to be really sitting up and paying attention to, because this trust is pretty damning. We are interested in how consumers feel about high bills at the same time as you'll have all seen these quite eye-watering profit announcements. When we asked this question, the profit announcements hadn't been made, but we did signal that we were expecting higher than usual energy company profits, which there's still one to declare, one gentailer still to declare, but so far they have absolutely been consistent with that expectation that they are absolutely higher than usual. This is another reason for trust declining in the sector at the rate that it is. This comes from a separate survey that we ran in February 2026. When we asked people about lots of different consumer issues, this was the area that we focused on when it came to energy. How are you feeling about the fairness in the system? Here on the screen, there are 3 different findings. The negative views that we received are shown in red, and the more positive are shown in black. You'll see there that 43% of respondents said that energy company profits were unacceptable, given the service that they're providing. By comparison, just under a third of respondents said that those company profits were acceptable. The second question there was views on fairness of the person's most recent power bill. Bearing in mind that when we asked this question, it was summer, it was February, so you would expect that bills would have been lower. 44% of people said that their most recent bill was unfair, while about 3 in 10 said it was fair. It would be really interesting if we were to run this question again in winter, because I think we would see quite different results. Finally, we did ask the question about the higher than usual energy company profits, which were being forecast at that time and have now come to fruition. 57% said that those profit levels were unjustifiable. Just 2 in 10 said that they were justifiable. So that's nearly 3 to 1 difference right there. Now, it's important to note this isn't us making a judgment about what profit levels are and directing people. This is us reporting directly what people told us when asked the question in neutral terms. Now, we asked consumers how well they thought the market was working. And you can see here, people do not think the market is working well for consumers. There's no question that the market is working well for the gentailers and some of the other players in the system. In general, more people feel the electricity market is working poorly than well, with around just a quarter of people saying actually the market is working well for consumers right now. Views have become more polarized since we asked these questions last year. Very poor ratings have increased, while fairly well ratings have decreased. 83% of people think there's room for improvement when it comes to regulating the energy market. The key takeaway is that most consumers, don't feel the market is working well for them, which raises the question, do consumers know about the protections that are currently available to them? So the consumer care obligations are protections that consumers have that came into effect in April 2025. When we asked the question in our retailer survey earlier this year, only 24%, that's slightly less than a quarter of New Zealanders, were aware of the consumer care obligations before they took the survey. 3 in 4 respondents did not know the consumer care obligations existed. What's quite worrying is the finding that awareness of the consumer care obligations, so that's the protection available to energy consumers, is lowest among low-income households. Just 20% of households earning less than $50,000 a year knew that these protections existed. The consumer care policy that each retailer has to provide to their customers, is the key communication for people to understand what those rights are and how the retailer is supposed to behave in a way that ensures that those obligations are met. An average of 18% of consumers told that their provider had made them aware of that consumer care policy. But rates vary significantly between providers. You'll see there that 33% of Electric Kiwi customers were aware of the consumer care policy provided by Electric Kiwi. Compare that with Mercury, where just 12% of Mercury customers told us that they were aware of the consumer care policy. Now, this will in part reflect the different customer profiles that each of these retailers is serving. But when hardship indicators are rising to the extent they are, when missed payments are up, when people are cutting back on heating, it's really quite damning that awareness of the protections that have been designed for households in difficulty remains low and is not rising alongside the rise in hardship. This is something that that we really feel strongly needs to be addressed, but as you'll see from all the information that we've shared, it's clear that the market is not delivering for consumers. And so this year at Consumer New Zealand, we have really focused on energy as an advocacy focus because there needs to be change. So what did that look like? We launched a campaign, we launched a petition in June this year with a 4-point plan to help us fight for cheaper power. And that was based on a report that we released at the end of July. There's been over 60 reports written about the electricity market since the late 1990s. What's different about this report is it's really focused on the consumer experience. So how does the market show up for New Zealanders? The findings of this report led to the call in our campaigns, our 4-point plan to bring down power prices. The campaign closed on Friday last week. The petition closed on Friday, and was signed by a record for us, 82,085 people. That's individual signatures. We will be presenting that petition to Parliament in mid-September. We have undertaken to our members and supporters that we will deliver this before the House rises for the election. We think it's vital that politicians really understand how big an issue this is. And so we wanted to come up with a plan, things that the experts hear that we think could make a difference. And so our 4-point plan suggests 4 things that need to happen to bring down power prices. Yeah. We need to address the dominance of the big 4 power companies. We think there needs to be a separation of generation and retail, so that's making power and selling power, so that smaller power companies can compete, which we think would lead to lower prices and more choice for consumers. We have concluded in our report that power prices don't reflect real costs. So in our 4-point plan, we have said that the market needs to be sorted so that consumers stop paying high fossil fuel prices for cheaper renewable energy. Our report concluded that we haven't invested enough in homegrown energy and consumers are paying the price for that. So in our 4-point plan, we have said we need to invest in more homegrown energy so that we do have enough power for years with less rainfall. And so as a nation, we reduce our reliance on expensive coal and gas. And finally, our report concludes that party politics have really got in the way of a long-term plan. And so the solution there, we think, is to set a long-term plan together, development of a cross-party energy strategy to put affordable power ahead of politics and vested interests. One of the reasons that we want to get this in front of the politicians before the House rises for the election is our finding that 55% of New Zealanders say that energy issues will affect how they vote in this election. This isn't something that officials, elected officials, can afford to ignore anymore. This, as you'll have seen from those hardship indicators that we shared, it's a national embarrassment. It needs to be addressed, and the politicians have the power to fix this. So that will be our call to them. Bring down power prices. Thank you for listening to all of our varied findings. If there are any questions, very happy to take them.
Hey folks, thank you so much. The data and the insight that you've shared is impressive and incredible. And I really acknowledge, Jess, particularly just the way you've, I think, been appropriately brutally honest about the issue, and not try to sort of, gild the lily, if there ever was a lily in that. I think in this situation, probably Ernie and Amy, it's probably best if we just perhaps each have share the floor with Jess and Paul, and share any comments or thoughts that we do, and we'll just and use the next 10 minutes or so to follow up from that amazing presentation. So if I could possibly start, just an observation that I've noticed from some people in the industry, well, not so much in the industry, but a sort of around the topic, is I think that they've redefined affordable, and they talk about affordable in terms of sometimes the capital cost of the kit. So solar's more affordable than building a big dam or something like that, and that may be true. And I think your evidence kind of points to the fact that we've lost sight of the reality for real people about what affordability really is. And I've seen that in a recent strategy that this region has put out too, where it's talked about affordability, but it didn't actually talk about it in terms of real households. So it's a comment really, as much as anything. I think Consumer New Zealand are so important in that regard. I sort of wondered whether the rise in power switch, I'm sure, is due to the quality of the product, but it must be connected too to that affordability problem. If fewer people were finding energy affordability such an issue, you probably wouldn't be seeing quite the rise in use or demand for power switch that you are. Is that a fair thing to say?
Well, there's two things. Getting people used to it and trusting it, but then the intent is stronger because it's got more real for people. The prices got higher. The average savings through power switch has increased. So people can save significantly more money than they used to by changing provider or changing the type of plan. But to your point before, I think I agree with you. What we've seen as a strategy from the industry is a normalization of abnormal outcomes. So we're seeing some extraordinary outcomes over time, and these are becoming normalized and explained away as inevitable, or just a function of the system we have. But that's not the case. So we want to push back on that. We don't believe energy should be the price it is. The mechanism by what we set electricity is what's causing the price. So yeah. So if you look at the market, we're not against markets. Markets can be good for consumers, right? They get innovation. Well-functioning competitive market will provide innovation. Will provide consumers with lots of choice, and will help keep it on prices. These are not outcomes we observe from this market. The outcomes we see from this market are not what you'd expect from a competitive market. You'll see a high market share persistently over time. So the top 4 gentailers have 86% of the market share. That's the same as it was 10 years ago, right? So, and they're also seeing very large profits. So in a normal competitive market, you would see a rush of competitors to come in there and do that. You don't observe that in electricity. So this is a market which isn't behaving like a market should. Yes, but what we're told is we should just persist with it because it will get better over time. So the market is supposed, and you pick me up. I'm not an economist, but it's supposed to deliver energy at the cost of electricity. So it's supposed to deliver energy at the long run cost of electricity, right? Which has been falling because the cost of making electricity has come down. The cost of solar and wind and producing electricity, because of technology change, has been reducing, right? And the New Zealand's proportion of renewable energy has increased. So the cost of energy has been coming down, but prices have been going up. And so the long run cost, the market did broadly follow the long run cost of electricity to about 2019. From 2019, the market's become completely detached. Like long run costs are way below what the price of electricity is on the market. So that, again, it's a big red flashing light that something has gone awry in the market. And yet the regulators have been really slow to act. As the Commerce Commission and Electricity Authority have not paid any heed to some clear signals that the market is not delivering expected outcomes, and are content just to tinker around the edges. And that we find that really frustrating. That gentailers will do what they do. That they will try and make as much money as they can because that's what they're kind of required to do. But if the rules of the game are having negative outcomes for households and consumers and the economy now, then look at those rules and change them. Don't just keep going, because these high prices are having a really adverse effect on people's health and well-being, right? And also the viability of our businesses. So why would we persist with that market? You know, it's basically we're shooting ourselves in the foot as a nation by allowing it to continue.
No, couldn't agree more. Thank you very much. Ernie, over to you. Just unmute your microphone.
Yeah, thanks, Harvey. Yeah, Paul, interesting. Hey, great presentation, you guys. But I just want to comment a bit on Paul's use of the term market, because, you know, it's very fashionable these days to use the word market for pretty much anything. Call me old-fashioned, but to me, infrastructure is not a market in the way in which chocolate fish or vacuum cleaners are. The electricity, you know, I was brought up at an age when we were all told that New Zealand was lucky to have abundant sources of energy. You know, we had all these rivers falling over waterfalls and able to, you know, build dams and so on and so forth. And yes, some of that's changed a little bit over the years, but essentially we still do have conditions of reasonable abundance. And I think where we have gone wrong is in being very theoretical about treating electricity as if it was a market like any other. It's quite different. It's much more complex. The core, the creation of electricity comes down to nature's forces, which are kind of, you know, our common property, if you like air. I mean, I'm sure there'll be a future government at some point that will find a way to tax the air that we breathe, but that is not how markets ought to work. So I think where we made a very serious mistake, and we weren't the only country, was in the Bradford reforms way back, and in trying to treat everything as if by applying market forces, all of a sudden you'll get efficient outcomes, because I think we've seen a disastrous outcome from all that. I don't know how we get back from that position that we're in. So I think what's been valuable about today is learning about how this is actually impacting on real people. Having spent a lot of time in telecommunications, I'm appalled that electricity is seen as a less trusted market even than telecommunications, which in my day would have been unheard of. But we need something better than the political debate that we get about all this at the moment, which is based all on theory with very little pragmatism and very little in the way of a plan.
Yeah, I think we would definitely agree with this. We did a podcast on the Bradford reforms, and we did some articles on it, and we actually interviewed Max Bradford at this very room and Jenny Shipley and asked them about it. And even they said, you know, they didn't regret it, but they said it hadn't turned out like they imagined. And even they were saying something needs to change because the outcomes they're seeing weren't what they expected or anticipated or desired. You know, when they brought the market in, it's a made market, right? It's not a market that evolves like other products that people and human beings are trading with each other. It had to be imposed, it had to be written into existence. Importantly, consumers never asked for this market, you know, and they've never shown any real enthusiasm for it. You know what I mean? And that's the fundamental flaw, is electricity doesn't naturally lend itself to a market for humans, because we find it boring basically, and it's not a product that you can really interact with or see, or, you know, it's not a product that lends itself easily to putting a market around. And on top of that, as any pointed out, I think, is that we've got some characteristics of the New Zealand system that don't lend itself well to the market structure we've put in place. So we've got TY there, which is maybe 10% of our or more of our is just in one load, and that creates massive uncertainty for people wanting to invest. You've got the dry year risk, you know, which creates uncertainty. There's no capacity market, which creates risk as well. And then you've got a consumer base that's kind of apathetic and not that interested. And on top of that, there's massive confusion. I think you'll remember from telecom days the strategy around, you know, just confuse customers and they won't change. So we see that a lot with power bills. All the power bills are different. There's nothing around power bills that makes them the same. Causes all sorts of problem. Like I said, no one even knows what plan they're on because it's not on the bill. You know, try and find out which electricity plan you're on. You can ring up your retail, they can't even tell you, right? So we've got 17,000 lines of different tariff data in New Zealand. We're a country of 5 million people. We've got 17,000 different tariffs. You know what I mean? Like, so that's the level of complexity is, so for people who find it boring in the first place, the level of complexity that you've got to unwind is just really off-putting. So again, that's why consumers don't engage with the market. So you've got all this perfect storm of things that are working against the market itself working. So yeah, the industry does very well off that, right? Because like I said, that 90% of people are paying more than they need to. How to see that with any other product where people would willingly pay more for identical products? It's exactly the same. There's no point of difference. It's not better electricity or faster electricity. It's the same. So hard to imagine any other product or service where people willingly pay more, and they don't willingly pay more. They just don't know. 30% of people in our surveying.
38.
Sorry, yeah, don't just think everyone charges the same. They think there's no point changing providers because they're all a bunch of rat bags. It doesn't matter which provider I'm with, that it's all going to cost the same anyway. They're completely wrong. But you understand why, because people would think, well, why would it cost different if I'm buying electricity from this provider, this provider? Why would it be different to my neighbour's price when it's all coming from the same national grid? So you understand why people think the way they do, but it's not true. And that's why the industry does quite well. It makes massive profits because people are paying way over the odds for something which is essentially the same.
And I think, just coming back to a point that you guys made earlier on, if one of the issues with changing is the risk that the new supplier you select won't take you on because of your credit rating, then the risk of that humiliation may to many people be a very big barrier to wanting to change.
Yeah, we've really scratched the surface here. We work with an energy hardship advocates group and FinCap. They were telling me that they will not tell people to change provider even if they find a cheaper provider, because of just that factor that they've had so many people turned away, and the shame, and there's cultural elements and there's age elements to it, of being turned away. So they actually, even when they using PowerSwitch, find lower cost providers for their clients, they will advise them not to change, because it's better to stay with the provider, because at least you've got a supplier who's prepared to supply you. As soon as you go out into the world and start trying to find new providers, chances are you won't find anyone wanting to take you on. And we see that PowerSwitch data, the conversion rates have dropped right off. So that's the rate at which people hit the switch button to them actually joining a new provider, right? Some retailers are only converting at 20%. So 10 people hit switch on PowerSwitch, only 2 of them join that retailer. So they're turning away 8 customers who want to join them. So that's dropped right off, right? So what kind of market are you turning away? You know what I mean? Like, what kind of market is this where you're turning away customers at that rate? Because of perceptions, they don't need those customers, but also they don't want to take on what they perceive as a risky customer. And the pool of risky customers is getting bigger. So it's a problem that's going to get worse, because, as like we said, the number of households who are now struggling to pay their power bill is getting bigger. That makes retailers less willing to take those households on. So the whole problem just gets worse and worse and worse.
And we don't have a right to electricity in New Zealand. We don't have a right to a connection. So yeah. That's a whole other discussion, but massive problem.
And what does all of this discussion say about the kind of society we've become?
Yeah, quite a lot. It almost sort of sounds like, from the consumer's point of view, sometimes it's better the devil you know, and it just kind of leaves you sitting there.
That's what I should have said, because that's a much more eloquent way than what I said. But that's exactly what people think in a nutshell. And that's unfortunate. But we believe there are solutions there. New Zealand is blessed with lots of low-cost renewable solutions. So we believe that there is plenty of scope for the price of electricity to be lower. Yeah, and that will help alleviate. You never eliminate energy poverty, but you can certainly make it a lot less prevalent than it is now. And you can certainly arrest the increase in energy poverty through some simple measures. There's nothing physically stopping us. It's really policy decisions, right? It's the physical system will deliver energy at a price people can afford.
Yeah.
So, Paul, you go back to your days of the NZED, and I'll go back to my point earlier in my career, where I had a couple of years of the Ministry of Works and the days that we were building Twizel and Huntly, and you and I together will get this problem sorted.
Yeah, I don't necessarily advocate just going back to like the good old days. I think you agree too. There was plenty of things that weren't great back then either. They were just different things. But certainly I think there's a middle ground there. That there are some benefits to some discipline around dispatch at least cost and all that. It's quite an elegant way to dispatch energy. But I was talking to one of the old even older than me, who was around when the market was formed, and he said that when they worked out the dispatch down the way that we do the dispatch of the least costs, he said that they never envisaged that would actually be the basis for what people actually paid. That's quite a dangerous step to go. It's a theoretical, like you say, theoretical way to do it. So that's actually quite good for making sure you're building things in the right place and dispatching and getting the right mix of generation. So those market forces are quite good for there. But in terms of actually seeing the price that households actually pay, especially in a system like New Zealand, which is prone to these price shocks, could be quite dangerous given it's the essential nature of electricity.
Mm, mm.
Not prudent anyway.
I often think, Paul, it's the same kind of economic theoretical purity, which is the reason we paid $9 or $10 for a block of butter as well. It's the same sort of weirdness about the full marginal price, and you just pay that whatever it happens to be. But I don't want to distract you with that. Hey, I wanted to come back to you talking about the alternatives around transportation, heating, and all those kind of things, and Rewiring Aotearoa were on our webinar series quite early on, and they talk about the 6 changes every household could make in the next 10 years, and you've confirmed that. And what I'm interested in is there's obviously an inertia with making some of those changes, and I wonder whether that's because the benefits of the change are spread out over a reasonable period of time. There's a payback time, and so to the extent that people aren't doing that, it must be because they're discounting those future benefits so heavily, unconsciously, that it's better to just keep paying a bit more now rather than facing an upfront cost and then having a return period over a period of years. Has Consumer or Power Switch thought about, are there ways in which that can be evened out more for people so that the decision to switch is easier now, and that they aren't forced to wait 2, 5, 10, 15 years to see the benefit?
Yeah, so it's really important, because I think Mike from Casey's, we work with him quite a bit as well. See, this is an access to capital problem. It's not a technology problem. And also the renters as well. Like close to half of households don't own the roof they live under. So for them, solar and a hot water heat pump and those sorts of things aren't an option for them. Even metering for those, we just did a submission on metering. You're at the discretion of your landlord. So a lot of people are locked out of cheaper power plants because of the meter in their house. And they can't give consent to change it. But it's an access to capital problem. We've just launched last week before last, a new electrification calculator on Power Switch. So it's called the Kogo calculator. We work with them, and that enables people to actually put their household details into the calculator, and it will calculate the value of certain types of, getting off gas or moving to an EV or solar or hot water heat pump. I think there's 2 steps: is convincing people, and that's what we can do in terms of consumer writing articles, myth busting, showing people the benefits of the appliance. And the second bit is, once they're convinced, then giving them the ability to do it through access to capital. And so there's the ratepayers scheme, which Rewiring's put forward. Other schemes are out there that people can get the advantage of this thing, because the danger we see is you'll get an exacerbation of inequity in society, because the people with access to capital can shield themselves from high costs. And I'm one of those people, right? So I've put solar on my house. I've moved to an EV. I've put a hot water heat pump in. I've got a time of use plan, so I've got the hot water coming on at night when the rate's half the price. I'm charging my EV in the weekend, so when the price is really low, and I'm producing a lot of my own energy now. So, one of the things I do is my prices haven't gone up. My costs have gone down. The prices have gone up, but my costs have gone down, because I've shielded myself, because I've got access to capital and knowledge to do these things. Now, that's out of the reach for a lot of New Zealand, who are paying way more than they were before, and they don't have the ability to shield themselves. You look at the cost of producing electricity is actually, I said before, reducing. Like the cost of solar is, if you look at the cost curves of solar, have really come down. So the price of electricity should be coming down. It's not, it's going up. But not for people like me who can put solar in. So this is the problem, is we're going to see a greater inequity where the people who have money pay a lot less, and that will get more and more over time. And the people who would most advantage from these technologies and through switching and whatnot are locked out of it. And so that's a real policy problem as well, because it's not a technology problem that strikes me. I'm an engineer, so it's not a problem of technology. The technology's there. It's a problem of getting people access to that technology, and that's what we're really struggling with as a society.
Yeah. Look, I'll ask one more question, then I'll leave the last comment to Ernie. One area where it did seem there was a lot of stickiness was gas, in terms of willingness to switch, and some of that might just be preference, which probably because they've never used the alternative. But something I've noticed recently, and I don't know that there's an industry organisation for gas, and they're actually quite enthusiastically advertising at the moment that there's no lack of LPG. Don't worry. And I suppose they're making a distinction between LPG and LNG, or natural gas or something. And I just thought, what's your understanding of that? Because there is a narrative, and obviously the price has gone up a lot. What's the situation with gas from your point of view?
Well, it's not helping. The gas guys are quite what's the word for it? What is the word? Aggressive, but they are. Yeah, they've been in our ear about they certainly are fighting quite fiercely to retain what is a sunset industry. And the reality is we're running out of natural gas, and the price of gas will probably continue to, compared to electricity, will continue to go up. And so we see there should be a plan. It's no one's fault. That was all done with, and but we need a transition plan nationally to get off gas, right? So it's not helping that you've got people like us and others advocating for a transition, and others sort of basically trying to hook up new houses. We're still seeing new houses being hooked up to the gas network, and gas companies charging large disconnection fees and putting out all sorts of information out there which is counter to other information, and pushing back very hard on us when we write articles. I mean, I'm a gas user myself, and I've still got legacy gas assets. When those gas assets fail, and they will be soon, my hob's 20 years old now, got an old gas fire. When it fails, I will replace it with electric alternative. I'm not going to rip it out tomorrow and replace it. So we just need a transition plan, but yeah, at the moment, like we said, we don't have a coordinated plan in the country. So the consumers are hearing different things, and developers. What we see with developers is putting in gas because it's the cheapest thing to do. Landlords, we've seen examples where landlords have replaced hot water cylinders with a gas califont, with a gas bottle, for a tenant because it's cheaper than replacing the cylinder. Right, we're seeing that sort of thing because from their point of view, that's the least cost because they're not paying the ongoing costs.
No.
So there's no policy or anything preventing that. So again, a tenant who was a beneficiary is paying huge bills because now she's paying for an LNG for hot water, LPG for hot water, when she was paying electricity before. So, and again, that locks her out of all these power plants, because as soon as you lose electric hot water, all those power plants that reward you for hot water control, ripple control, go off the table, right? So again, you're playing over the odds. So, but again, there's no rules around that. There's no rules stopping a developer putting in gas into a new build, and there are, because it saves space. Califonts are smaller. So again, there's no plan for New Zealand to do that. But there are cultural elements that there are certain groups who like gas because they've grown up with gas in their communities. That's what they cook with. There are people, there's a strong, also resilience is a big thing when you talk to people about gas. They like having gas because they see it as they've got two sources of fuel. And if there's an earthquake or something, they think, well, I've still got my gas, especially rural areas that are subject to power cuts and stuff. So there's that element as well. There's a resilience element, but those are quite small in terms of the broader population. And again, I'd say if resilience is the thing, a battery and solar is probably better than, or just as good as gas. I mean, I'd still say gas for a barbecue and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But there's a whole lot of reasons. It's complex. Gas is really complex and emotional. People have a real, unlike other things, or I guess vehicles as well. There's a bit of an emotional attachment to petrol vehicles and diesel vehicles. and a bit of a cultural thing there as well. So it is complex consumer behaviour and those things.
I suspect a couple of generations ago there were people who were reluctant to get away from a coal range for quite the same reason. Ernie, can I leave any last comments to you before we close the hui?
Yeah, very quick last comment, Harvey. Harvey, you mentioned this being the electricity election. Jessica's slide showed that cost of living is absolutely top of the pops in terms of what people are concerned about. And yet when you look at the lead up to the elections going on, the politicians seem quite oblivious to a lot of the stuff. And we're never going to get an better opportunity than the next few weeks to try and bring this to the top of the agenda. I still maintain my view that this is less of a market problem than a political problem. I think, we mucked up the politics right at the beginning with the Bradford reforms, and it's probably a suggestion that's too late, Harvey, but I wonder whether you thought about getting Max Bradford to come along and present to one of these sessions, because I'd love to hear him today, and I have a bit of history with the guy, to hear what he thinks of it.
Let's do it, Ernie.
The question is, how do we fix this? And I go back to the days when Irish jokes were in vogue, so I'll apologise for telling it. But there used to be a story about a tourist who was in the Irish countryside and got lost. And a local yokel came along, and the tourist stopped him and said, "Excuse me," he said, "are you able to tell me the way to Belfast?" And the local guy thought about it for a bit, and he said, if I was going to Belfast, I wouldn't start from here. And why I tell that is that I think that's the story of our electricity industry at the moment. How the hell do we get from the complete and absolute bugger's muddle of a structure that we have now into something that will go back to serving consumers and businesses and industries well as it did in the 1980s and before. So that's my contribution. Thanks. Very good presentation, you guys. Well done. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Ernie.
And feel free to spread the slides and stuff.
We absolutely will. They'll be online really shortly, and we'll do our best to get them out to as many people as we possibly can,
Cool.
as well. And we'll see if we can track down Max Bradford. I guess it's incumbent on us to give us the right reply as much as anything.
And we got hold of him, and he was actually I was quite surprised how open he was. And then we had Jenny Shipley come in as well and spoke to us for over an hour about her thoughts. And she was very unvarnished. It wasn't like she was promoting it. She said, "This is what happened. This is why we did it. This is what we thought would happen. It hasn't happened. This is what I think needs to change." They're wasn't apologising for what it was. They thought they still believe it needed to happen, and they still believe in the principle of it. But what they're saying is the outcome that we're seeing isn't what they expected or believe should have happened. They expected it to be much more vibrant and and with consumer benefits.
Yeah, well, the law of unintended consequences, huh? All right, folks, I'm mindful of the time, and Jess and Paul, I'm so grateful for the time that you've given us and the considerable energy and effort and passion that you have shown. I think we're all so much better for having you and Consumer and Power Switch operating. It's making a huge difference, and the statistics you gave, Paul, on how much you've saved people in real dollars is something that I'm sure you're very proud of, and it's amazing to hear about it too. So thank you again. I'll close the hui with a karakia and send you all on your way. And again, thank you everybody for being part of the hui today. He karakia. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te atawhai o te tātou ariki, o ihu karaiti, me te araha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga, ki te wairua tapu, aki. Āmene. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.